Welcome to Unlock You with Dr. Shannon Crawford. And today our guest is Preston Woody, who is an executive coach and just a badass man, a leader, a husband, a father, and you help take people to the next level.
Yes.
So today we're talking about healthy masculinity.
So excited.
That's awesome. Okay, so why is this a passion area for you, and why do we need to be talking about healthy masculinity?
I think healthy masculinity wasn't my choice of an obsession. And so first off, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my heart and passion. In 2020, I was in a career that I thought was going to be my lifetime career.
Okay.
And I was making an impact. I was skilled at it, and people's lives were being changed. On the other hand, I felt like the Holy Spirit spoke to me in 2020 that I have a lot of teachers, but very few fathers, and I'm teaching you to become a father.
Wow.
And to father people. At that time, I had no kids.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite know what that meant, but I knew that I needed to begin to pursue developing and investing in the lives of men. And so the Holy Spirit began to teach me what healthy masculinity looked like. And during that time, I was in my career, yet I began to gain anxiety. I don't know if you've ever had anxiety before. I got depression, and so I got on depression medication, anxiety medication. And I thought anxiety was, I understand depression, right? But I thought anxiety was for weak people until I got it. And one day, I'll never forget, I was with my wife, about ready to go to our in-laws for a party, and I had I guess it would be a panic attack.
Okay.
Where I got tunnel vision, and I was embodying all of the characteristics that I perceived to be weak. And I remember just laying there, and I cried on her lap for 30, 40 minutes, just not knowing what to do, how to handle my emotions, where to even go. And it was as if in that moment, I realized that I was according to what I believe the Lord was speaking to me, in a place of disobedience. Something happens internally where you feel what I call imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
When you're not doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. Wow. And the reason why I was doing what I was doing and working where I was working is it was working. I was gaining an income. I was supporting my new wife. Lives were being changed, and I was good at it. But there's a difference between what's good and what's God. And that was a catalyst for me stepping out and pursuing men's coaching.
Okay.
Yes.
So why in society, why in time is this the most important conversation that we're having of what is healthy versus toxic masculinity versus passive lack of masculinity?
You know, it was in 1901, where Vladimir Lenin wrote a statement on how to destroy the West. One of the primary ways was destroy ruggedness as a virtue.
Whoa.
Get men onto sexy books, get men into entertainment and shows rather than paying attention to what's meaningful. Wow. Now that's only about 3 of about 20.
Yeah, strategy.
And another one was destroying the nuclear family.
Yeah.
When I realized that, something on the inside of me just shifted and turned, and it didn't become I should do this. It became a have to. Like I have to. I have to stand up because who else is going to do it?
Yeah.
And I had a wonderful model of masculinity from my father. My father took me on a rites of passage experience when I was 12 years old.
Oh,
he took me to the Grand Canyon, and we went on a hike together, and he gave me his blessing. And then I started to ask myself the question, how many men have had that experience of saying, you are a man? And I think a lot of men today don't know whether or not they're a man, and they're still living as boys, or what I call teenage men.
Yeah.
Is doing life in a little boy sense. And so what really shifted me, and I guess the origin story was, my house was a space where younger men, maybe when I was between 10 and 12, would come with guys with father issues. And I'll never forget, we were driving to a friend's house to pick up a buddy of mine, and there were police cars at their house. And I remember being a little bit concerned, not really knowing what's going on, but we were going to pick up my friends, and they hop in the car. And I later learned that their father had been going off, being violent toward their mother. The boy, well, as my friend, had called the police. And our home over really most of my teenage years was a refuge for young men. And so I got to see what it meant to be a father. And now, therefore, I feel like I have the responsibility to give what I have to a society and a world and a generation that doesn't have it.
Exactly. And what a game changer it is. And as a man, what was it like for you to have a dad who instilled confidence and identity and rite of passage? What do you think that did in you? And then by contrast, for a lot of men that don't have that, what do you see?
My father taught me responsibility.
Wow.
Responsibility is nothing in this world is happening to me. It's all happening for me. And
Say that again.
Nothing in this world is happening to you.
Yeah.
It's happening for you.
That's good.
And until you believe that, you will never take responsibility for your life.
Yeah.
My father taught me that you can't blame anyone or anything for what they did do to you or what they didn't give you.
Yeah.
And until you can get to that space, you can't take responsibility for your life. And so what happens is men aren't able to take responsibility for their own life. Therefore, their life is in chaos.
Yeah.
And they don't have order in their life, so they can't bring order to their world. So first things first. So my goal, my mission, my passion is to help bring order to the lives of men.
Come on.
So that they can go bring order to their world.
That's so good. And so for the guys that grow up with a dad, maybe in or out of their life, or just a guy that kind of watched a lot of TV and sports and just didn't really lean into fatherhood, whether it was physically there or just kind of checked out, what would you say is the contrast? You had responsibility. What did they grow up with? What do you see for a lot of men?
Are you referring to a man who maybe either had a passive or an absent father?
Yeah.
So what happens is if a man doesn't have that model, they're going to go in two directions. So fathers are either in the household and they're passive, which means they're there, but they're not there.
Right.
Which is what we have today
Super
on a
checked
massive
out.
scale.
Exactly.
Or their father was absent.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is actually better because on the first, if a father's in the house and they're passive, then they see their father is here, but they're not choosing me. They're choosing something else to look at.
Yeah.
When a father's absent, they know that, oh, dad chose something else. Maybe he's split from mom. He's working really hard.
Yeah.
Right. But when in this culture with a passive man, it's rejection every single day.
Yeah.
Every single day.
Yeah.
Because there's proximity and you're seeing your dad choose something else. And so that's what we have. We have an orphan spirit.
Yep.
And so ultimately right now, I think the time has come to show men what it looks like, a model for what masculinity actually means.
Come on.
And so right now we have men talking about identity all the time, okay? And identity is wonderful. And I think that it's the starting place to find our identity in Christ as sons of the Most High King. Yet, identity can also be Disneyfied. What I mean by that is identity equals going off on my own journey to find myself, right? When masculinity isn't about necessarily finding yourself, but it's rather, I believe, about taking on your God-given roles, which is what I believe are the 4 roles of a man.
Yeah. Let's lean into that.
Yeah,
what
wonderful.
are they?
Well, role number 1 is the role of the king. And the role of the king is your divine responsibility to bring order.
Yeah.
Okay? So a king needs 2 things. He needs chaos and order. Well, that seems like it cancels itself out. Well, it does. Because if there is no chaos, then there's no use or need for a king. So oftentimes men will see chaos and they'll abdicate and look away from that space.
Yeah, that's right.
When it's actually their responsibility to come and bring order to.
Yeah.
And I say order, not tyranny.
Which
Order,
then gets us out of the toxic masculinity.
correct. Which what I call our shadow types, which would be not the king, but the tyrant.
Okay.
So the tyrant sees disorder and will go in and utilize control, domination, and domineer the situation. And on the other end, now there's another side to it. So that'll be either a controlling man, or on the other side, a man will become a puppet, which I call a passive man.
Yeah.
Now we have this spiking up so much more with men afraid to not be perceived as controlling.
Exactly.
And so therefore they let maybe their wife make all of the decisions. They let their kids do what they want to do. They never really speak their opinion or even gain their opinion.
They want.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then we have wives that are frustrated because the men aren't leading them.
Yeah.
And so if a man is not leading his wife, then she's having to take up roles that aren't hers, and therefore she's having to let go of the roles that she's uniquely designed to operate in and thrive in.
And she's probably becoming bitter and resentful.
Absolutely, absolutely. But the man thinks that if I'm doing what she wants me to do, it'll make her happy.
It's out of order. It's not the right alignment.
And that's why I call that role the puppet. It's really in the scriptures. There's an example of it.
Yeah.
Of in the kingdom of Israel, there's a king by the name of Ahab, and there's a queen by the name of Jezebel. Now, Jezebel is extremely controlling and overtly assertive.
More dominant.
Yet, on the other hand, we have Ahab, who is a high performer, yet he's very, very passive.
Yeah.
And he's controlled by this domineering queen, right? And therefore, his whole kingdom falls apart as a result because he's afraid of poking the monster, right? And that's where I feel like we've become as a culture.
Yeah.
Is we've allowed and we've been tolerating so much immorality, and it's affecting our children. It's affecting our businesses, our workplaces, and that's because men have been afraid to be what I call in a godly way assertive.
Yeah.
Assertiveness.
So we need men who are kings.
Yes.
Not tyrants, not puppets.
Yes.
What's next?
Yes, the next one would be the role of the warrior.
Okay.
Now the idea of
Watch
the
him
warrior.
lean in.
Yeah, go ahead and kick the table. The warrior is even in this context, the warrior needs two things. Like the king needs order and chaos, but the warrior needs two things. So it's resistance and breakthrough.
Come on.
So oftentimes men are avoid things that have resistance, like putting themselves out there in a space where they might get rejected, or doing something that's a high degree of difficulty, or even right now, like reaching out and talking and asking a girl out because they're afraid of the resistance.
Yeah.
But a man needs it. A man needs a degree of resistance, but also a man needs a degree of breakthrough. So you need both.
Yeah.
So a man will always need a degree of resistance in their life. And that's, what are you fighting? What are you fighting towards? What's your mission? What are you pushing toward? What are you living for? What's the hill that you're going to die on?
And you're asking yourself right now.
And those are the questions that are like uncovering, okay, what's the resistance in my life? Now, you also need a degree of breakthrough. So men, if they're unwilling to face resistance in a healthy way, they'll find it in a perverse way.
Yep. So what are some examples?
Well, unfortunately, men will, instead of facing resistance in the real world, will create artificial resistance. And that's where we have men addicted to video games, pornography, and in the most perverse way, that's a way that men are gaining resistance and their own little breakthrough, tension and release. And so if you don't find it in a healthy way, you're going to create it in an unhealthy way. So the warrior can either be on the toxic or the shadow type, which I call it, is the rogue. And the rogue is one who is avoiding all resistance. Okay. And the rogue will avoid confrontation.
Kind of isolating, that kind
The
of?
rogue will isolate himself. And yet on the other side, it's like the Viking or the mercenary who is going to get that domination and join with a group of mercenaries. And that's where you find people who oftentimes will be very, very immoral and domineering in business. And the mercenary is conquering and domineering, and the rogue is ditching. They're backing out. They're just scavenging to see what they can find. And then let's talk about the third type, which is the poet. Oh, I love the poet. It's such a beautiful role to operate in. The poet looks like, for me, dad coming home at the end of the day and running and picking up the kids. The poet looks like, for men, is how are you succeeding as a poet? Are you producing smiles where you go? Sometimes poetry can look like a song that you bring. It can look like laughter. It can also look like a sincere compliment to produce a smile on someone's face.
Yeah.
Like what does the poet bring? The poet brings meaning where there is suffering. So no matter how much suffering and pain is going on, it's I believe a man's responsibility to bring meaning to that situation,
Wow.
to bring the beauty. And so oftentimes men don't see that as a masculine characteristic. Men can get ruggedness and masculinity confused.
Okay.
As masculinity isn't always being hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes masculinity is being intentionally soft and showing what beauty can come from suffering and painful moments. And so if you're not operating though, as the poet, you can go to your shadow types, which is the less assertive type, which would be the addict. So if you're not creating meaning and joy and operating as the poet, you're going to fall into a more addict role, where that's where you find men getting into sedating their suffering rather than producing meaning out of it.
Yeah.
An addict will be someone who's not willing to look at their suffering in the eye and engage with it. They're going to numb it out. They're going to sedate it. And that's where addicts come from.
Wow.
They've abdicated their role of taking suffering that's happened maybe to you and realizing, you know what, this isn't happening to me, this is happening for me. So how can I bring beauty to the world?
Yeah.
Now, we have the addict on the other end, but on the other end, there's the playboy shadow type, which is much more overt, which is going to take beauty. Maybe that's the person who maybe go out and I even hate the term, but be proud of their body count per se.
Yeah.
That's the person who sees what's beautiful and wants to take it.
Conquer it,
right?
yeah.
And so the healthy, and they're going to end up causing suffering rather than bringing meaning in any sense. So that's what it looks like as far as the poet goes.
And so to clarify, men, you don't have to actually be poetic or artistic. I just love the language you use around it. And when I was hearing you speak before, you talked about even playing with your daughter, like this playful side of you. What does that look like as a dad, as a husband, to like show up with that poetic side and bring play into an environment?
That's beautiful. I'll never forget when my daughter was born, and she was 6 weeks old at the time, and a lot was going on at work and in my career, and so I remember I had my phone out and I was going through email and my messages, and then I was holding my daughter simultaneously. My wife was out, and I felt something on my hand, and so my daughter had like moved my hand, and she was six weeks old, right? And so I looked at her, gave her a kiss, and got back to what I was doing, and then I felt it again. She moved my hand.
Wow.
Like my daughter at 6 weeks old realized that dad was with her, but he wasn't with her.
Come on.
So what does it mean? It means to bring all of your depth of presence into every single moment. So oftentimes we can reserve our presence. We can be here physically, but not here emotionally, spiritually, psychologically.
That's
like
right.
100% present in every single moment. The reason we aren't present is because we're afraid of suffering.
Yeah.
Like if we give it all and we fail, then we actually fail because we gave it all. So what it looks like is bringing your full depth of presence as a man into every single moment, not reserving anything to bring joy, laughter, and play. So what it looks like with my daughter is giving her my full attention, my presence. What it looks like with my son is playing and wrestling really hard and throwing him on the bed. It looks like us going to the trampoline park. We love the trampoline park. Yes, it's very dangerous, but we have so much fun.
Yeah.
And that's what it looks like, is being the dad that's out there on the trampolines, like jumping around with their kids, because play is more valuable than perception.
It's so good.
That's what it looks like.
I love it. Have we covered all four?
And the last one is the priest.
Okay.
The role of the priest. Now, this is one of the most, I think they're all equally important, but this was a foundational one. What is the priest? The priest needs two things. It needs understanding and both mystery. And that's the man's desire and need for understanding. And ultimately, I believe it's the things of God and understanding their Heavenly Father, and then engaging also with that mystery. Now, on the shadow types would be the wanderer. And the wanderer is someone who is never quite certain of anything.
Oh, I've
The
seen
wanderer is someone who
Like
is
overthink?
always praying about it, but never doing about it.
that. Man, I've seen that.
The wanderer is someone who's maybe going from space to space, environment to environment, and never really digs down and creates roots.
Yeah.
Their life is filled with question marks, not periods. And they kind of have an obsession with mystery, no certainty. Like, what is faith? Faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you don't see.
Come on.
And they don't have faith because they don't have certainty. And so on the other end, you have the wanderer, but then if you're not operating as the wanderer, you might operate as what I call the showman or the performer. And the picture that I get of that is The Greatest Showman, where life is a show. I turn on everything externally is a show, and I'm going to show you how smart, competent I am. The showman says, I know a lot. They don't ask a lot of questions, and they want to show you what they know, and therefore they don't have the humility to learn anything.
Whoa.
And so
that's high risk, by the way.
Certainly is.
Yeah.
And certainly is. And so that's asking the question is, why do you operate in those roles? Well, ultimately, like let's go from the very beginning. The role of the king is ultimately the role of the father. Like every man has a responsibility to father, whether or not they have kids. It's who in your life is younger than you that you can pour into and take responsibility for.
That's good.
There's plenty of orphans.
Mentors, yes.
Plenty of, yes. Second is the warrior that's the role of the brother. That's where the idea comes from in the scriptures is who is the friend that sticks closer than a brother?
Wow.
His name's Jesus. Jesus modeled that to us.
Yeah.
So that's where brotherhood and mutual challenge comes from. And the poet, that's the role of the lover. That's where your masculine gift is bringing love. It's bringing meaning. It's pursuing and it's wooing. And it's fighting for and winning the heart of that person that you love so dearly.
So
and then finally, the priest is really the role of the son. Ooh. It's coming into a place of submission and going to the Father to seek out the mystery, to gain the understanding, to come and bring back to your world.
So good. And there's one thing you had said in a prior talk that I heard you share on, that all of this is targeting one thing. But for the sake of time, we have to wrap here. But in our next episode, if you'll follow for next week, he's going to give us keys on how to get unlocked as a man so that you can live in all four healthy dimensions and not the shadow types. And the one way that you can know that you are unlocking your community and your tribe through your healthy masculinity. And ladies, if you're listening, we want to encourage you to create space for the men in your life to have healthy masculinity. Thanks, guys.